Hi, everyone. This is May Mahmoud. I'm a postdoc researcher at the Senate Lab at New York University, Abu Dhabi. And I'm here to talk to you about a research where we investigated how, when students use ChatGPT at their learning, how does this affect their computational thinking skills? And this work was in collaboration with Eric Asari, Nisa Shahid, Nurhan Saar, and Sara Nati. But before I tell you about our research, I want to tell you a story of Maya. Maya is a sophomore computer science student that was taking object-oriented design courses, and she started to learn about abstraction and decomposition, thinking about entities, how to abstract the idea of those classes, what are the fields to have, what are the methods, and she found that when she used ChatGPT, to help her come up with a design and come up with a solution, she can reach an answer easily and in short time. Fast forward to Maya's summer internship, and where she joined a fintech company, and they tasked her with a refund make the design for the refund processor for their system. And however, there is one catch: this company does not allow access to any Gen AI tools because of security reasons. So Maya found that she had attempted to do the task on her own as she tried to think, okay, so what are the classes that I should have? How can I decompose this problem? Or what are the method that I should have in each class? She struggled without access to tools like ChatGPT. And this is just not the story of Maya. These are the patterns that we're seeing constantly in computer science education. Students have access to the generative AI tools and they use it extensively in their coursework. However, how that use of such tools affect the development of their computational thinking skill, and importantly, on the long-term efficiency of such skills is still not clear. So there is the lack of empirical data about the effect of such tools. And when we talk about computational thinking skills, we're talking about those essential skills a software engineer need to develop in order to come up with an efficient solution. So think similarly to decomposition and abstraction when they need to break up a problem into smaller parts, abstract in a way the problem into keeping up with what's the essential feature there, things like pattern recognition and algorithmic thinking. And in our research, we're only focusing on decomposition abstraction. So this led us to our research question. We tried to ask about if a student have access to ChatGPT and they're learning to solve object-oriented design, does this help them to or affect them, hinder their ability to learn abstraction decomposition? And we use object-oriented design because by nature, it elicits decomposition abstraction thinking because students need to think about what are the entities to include in the design, what are the required methods or field in each class. And so we designed a between subject experiment where some of the participants were assigned a control group where they didn't have access to ChatGPT at their learning, but they have access to traditional web search. And other participants were assigned to experiment group where they have access to ChatGPT. Now, our experiment consists of a study session where students start by having the researcher introduce them to the study and then give them a training about abstraction decomposition, the object-oriented design, walking them through a description of a system and have them think about, okay, so what are the classes or the entities that should be here and such forth. And then this leads us into the learning phase where students work on two learning tasks. And 50% of the participants have access to ChatGPT as we discussed those in the experiment group. Now, after the learning phase, they go through a testing phase where they have no access to any learning resources and they work on two tasks. And then finally, we have them fill out a post-study questionnaire asking about their experience in the session and their confidence in solution and such. Now, we invite students after the study session within a week to sit through a retention test. And they work on a design task similar to the one that they did that they were learning. And then we ask them to also fill out a final questionnaire. Now, when you talk about the tasks, the way we present to the student is in a Google Colab notebook where we give them at first some instructions, so what tools they have access to, and then we give them a scenario, which is just an English description, natural language description of the system, and then we walk them through how they can solve the task or write the task by identifying classes, listing what methods and field they need to have. Now, the participant that we're looking for, we wanted students that are efficient and have efficient software engineer or programming skills, but didn't yet take any more advanced courses. They haven't yet developed this more advanced design skills. And we were able to recruit 21 participants, 11 of which were assigned to the control group versus 10 assigned to the experiment group. And our profile of the students confirmed to what we're looking for. So 71% of those were in their freshman or sophomore year and having less than 2 years of programming experience. And the way we balanced or assigned participants, we first balanced them based on proficiency or profile, and then randomly assigned them to one of the group, and we compared, we didn't find any significant difference between the groups. So this confirmed that our group were balanced. Now, what did we find? In terms of completion time, we found that those who's in the experiment group, throughout the study session, they solved or finished the task faster. So as you can see here, was they solved the learning task as well as the testing task in faster than the control group. So all in all, they saved an average around 9% of the allocated time. However, when we move to the retention test, which happened a week later, we find that the control group actually finished faster. So the control group saved around 70% of the allocated time. Now, when we talk about text correctness, so when we look at how well they did it in terms of their solution, we find somewhat of a similar pattern in the learning phase. So those who in the experiment group were able to had a better solution, which is, it's intuitively they have access to generative AI. However, interestingly, once we have removed this access, in the testing phase, the control group caught up in the first task, and in the more difficult task, they actually did better than the experiment group. And in the retention session as well, they did better than the experiment group. So we see in the experiment group, they scored higher only during the learning task. Now, this is a story when we're looking at a group. However, how does it, what happened for each individual? So the way we did it, we tried to look at how the different performance, starting from the testing task up to the retention, or the learning task up to the retention, how did the performance of each individual happen? So we found that for the experiment group, 11%, only 11% were able to improve their performance. However, 3% maintain it while 56% decline. So their performance from the learning phase up to the retention decline. On the opposite side, we actually found that the control group, as we move from the learning phase to the retention, 40% improved their performance while 50% maintain it, and only 10% decline. So one thing we also wanted to look is, because self-awareness of your abilities is an essential thing that you need to master a skill. So what we did is we asked students about their confidence solution, and if we found that someone who had low score but have high confidence, we consider them as overconfidence, and the opposite. If they had high score and low confidence, that they're underconfidence. And what we actually wanted to look is in the well-calibrated participants, so those who can really identify their performance. So those with low scores and who had low confidence of their skill, they have better awareness and well-calibrated participants. So when it comes to the testing score versus their confidences in the their solution, we found that the experiment group were better calibrated. They actually, 70% of them were able to identify or kind of assess their abilities versus 27% of the control group. However, when we move to the retention score, we actually see the opposite, that the control group actually becomes better aware of their performance. So 27% are well calibrated, from the testing score up to now in the retention test, 50% were able to be more aware, while the experiment group lost their initial calibration. And one thing we did also is that we looked at the prompting patterns. And so we identify pattern based on prompts based on patterns. So if a student asked ChatGPT to give them the solution, direct solution, we call this the direct solution pattern. And we find that 27% were in the solve pattern, while 23% were in the explain pattern. And 18% only ask for kind of those partial guidance. So we see a pattern here that ChatGPT does provide some initial benefit. However, they are fleeting, so mean that they fade away with time. As we've seen, students in the study session, they can finish the task faster. In the learning phase, they have better solution, and at the beginning in the study session, they had wild calibration. So our takeaway message, so kind of to think about what are the results of telling us, as an educator, we actually, it's good that we don't ban AI, but integrate it early so that students have this initial benefit. They kind of finish the task faster. They see it as less complex, and then we need to create AI-free checkpoints. So these are tasks that they need to do on their own, and then similar to what we did is kind of get them to reflect on their solution, kind of compare how well that they know of their kind of performance. So to kind of help them develop the self-awareness through feedback. And the next thing is that we want to teach them better prompting. So rather than using prompt like "give me the solution to," or "why did you suggest that," which is better than the direct solve, but it's still kind of offload a little bit of the cognitive thinking to the tool. We actually want them to kind of think through it and actually ask for those partial guidance from the tool. So in summary, we did a between subject experiment that focused on the composition abstraction as a computational thinking skill, and we found that ChatGPT provide fast but fleeting initial benefit. And we do give two messages, takeaway messages to educator by having early integration plus reflection and teaching better prompting. Thank you so much for listening. If you're interested, you can read our paper more about it in our preprint. If you're interested to replicate our study, please reach out and you can access our application package by scanning this QR code. And finally, you can read more about what we do at the Senate Lab. Thank you so much for listening.